First is emergency services, and there are a number of people in this room who've been away the last week due to the flooding in Mississippi. I mean, of the Mississippi. The cadet program, and I have my cadet corps here off to my left. But the third part of it is aerospace education, and that's not just inside Civil Air Patrol, but for the public at large. And so this presentation tonight, for those of you who are interested, if Commander Ritchie would stand for a minute, please. Juliet Ritchie, or Captain Juliet Ritchie, is our squadron commander. If any of you are interested in the mission of Civil Air Patrol, I would encourage you to seek her out after this meeting. And that includes high school students. We run a cadet corps, we're a composite squadron. That squadron focuses a lot on STEM and aerospace, but cadets can take an active role in emergency services, and do. So if those things interest you, Devin Murray, senior member Devin Murray, who's also standing as one of the cadet officers. If you're a high school student and you have an interest in this, please do see him afterwards. I've got one other organization I need to plug quickly, and that is, especially since we have so many high schoolers here, there are quite a number of members of EAA 414 here. And that's the Experimental Aircraft Association. For those of you who are high schoolers who are under 18 and have an urge to try flying, we run a program called the Young Eagles, and you can fly free. And Ed Wilgris, where are you out there, Ed? So he's put his hand up in the back. If you're interested in that program, please see Ed. But EAA deals with home-built aircraft and antique aircraft and warbirds and aerobatics and stuff like that. So we have something for every aeronautical interest. If you're not involved already and you want to find out how to get involved, John Cecilia, would you raise your hand? John is also in the back. Should have had him sit in the front. Who's the membership chairman of EAA 414, or you can see me, I wear hats in both organizations. So please, it's good to see you here. I'd like to run one quick thank you before we go forward, and that is none of this would have been possible without the help from the folks at District 128. We kind of lost our home in the middle of the year, and we're scrambling around trying to figure out what to do. And Diane Phillips, I'm not sure if she's here tonight. There she is. And John Fischel and all the folks at District 128 who opened their home to us and have acceded to so many requests at short notice to help us be able to present things like this to you tonight. I'll introduce our main speaker. So our speaker tonight has been flying for the better part of 3/4 of a century and is still here to talk about it, which is good because I don't have a Ouija board with me. He is a recipient of the Wright Brothers Award, which is the Master Airman's Award, which you receive after 50 years of distinguished and more than competent aviating. He is also a member of the Aviation Hall of Fame. World War II veteran. I'd like to present our speaker tonight, Howard Levinson. 42, take it
Say it again?
You get a chance, put them at ease and sit them down. Okay.
I did quite good. I'm sorry, I didn't pick up on what you said.
Floor is all yours, sir.
Okay, thank you. Cadets are not going to stand through this whole thing, are they? How
Captain, sit down. Put them at ease and sit down.
cadets sit down. I'd like to start off this program tonight by introducing you to what I did growing up. I was born in Chicago, June 22nd, 1923, to two Chicagoans. My mother and father both were born in Chicago. So we have a long history of being Chicagoans and living in the area. Of course, there was some time when I did live in the area, and that was during World War II. Along with my talk tonight, I'm going to tell you about some of my failings, because I really wasn't the sharpest tack in the box. And I just wanted, I will bring those failings in and show you how persistence prevailed, and I finally was able to accomplish what I wanted to accomplish. So I have some of these folders out on persistence, and I'd like to read it to you, to those of you who do not have a copy, and I do have adequate copies for anybody that would like to take one with them. Persistence. Nothing in the world can take the place of persistence. Talent will not. Nothing is more common than unsuccessful men with talent. Genius will not. Unrewarded genius is almost a proverb. Education will not. The world is full of educated derelicts. Persistence and determination alone are omnipotent. The little guy by the name of Calvin Coolidge wrote that. And I just kind of lived by that theory perhaps most of my life. When I was growing up, it was during the Depression, and we were poor. We were on the poor side of poor. I mean, I was shuffled to relatives. My parents couldn't afford to keep me. I had hand-me-down clothes. I had shoes that had, I was lucky I had shoes, but they had holes in them. And when I went to school, I had to put cardboard in the shoes. So I knew what it was like to be poor. And as a result of that, there are a couple of other things that happened too. And I'm going to tell you the bad things as well as the good things. When I was in second grade, I was at Mary Lyons School on the Northwest Side. And by the way, I went to 6 different grade schools because every time the rent was due, we had to move. And I had this teacher, Mrs. Matthew, and she told me to stand up. I stood up, she says, "What are you?" I says, "I'm part German, I'm part English, and part Russian." She says, "You're a liar, you're a Jew, sit down." I happened to be the only Jewish kid in the class, I guess, or maybe the whole school, because I just kept shuffling around from place to place. But all these things that happened to me, being poor, having hand-me-down clothes, having to be shuffled to my relatives, had an impact upon my personality. And I felt pretty inferior at that time. And I didn't think I could accomplish anything. But I did go to high school, and I went to Roosevelt High School in Chicago. And that school, as many of you know, was written up by the Greatest Generation writer, Brokaw, who said that he mentioned that school because it had so many geniuses in it. I was not one of them, but a lot of the people did work on the atomic bomb in Chicago from that school. So it was really a great learning factory, except for me. I was there just to take up space. I would take my books home, put them on the table. I had no study habits. I knew nothing about how to go about it. My parents, I don't think my mother and father ever went through high school. I doubt it. So I had no guidance along that line. However, I still went to college. I went to Wright Junior College. And while I was at Wright Junior College, or just before that, I met a little girl when I was living with my grandmother and going to Roosevelt High School. She lived near Sheridan and Irving Park in Chicago, and I had a bike I used to ride back and forth to school. I met this girl, I was introduced to her, and then I was at Wright Junior College, and I met her again, and we became a couple, and that was the first serious relationship that I ever had. And happens that I married her, and we lived together very happily. We knew each other for 75 years, and she passed away in July of this year, of last year. She had confidence in me that I did not have, and she let me know about it. She constantly told me that I could do it, I could do it. So now comes the part that became difficult. I wanted to fly from the time I was 4 years old. I always wanted to fly. That was one of my dreams. I wanted to fly desperately, and along came the war on December 7th, 1941. I was just starting college, and I met Harriet, my wife, and I went down to the recruiting office on Franklin Street in Chicago. I don't know how I got there. I think it was a 3-cent streetcar ride to get downtown. And went down there, took the test, flunked. Well, they said you can take it as many times as you want. I went down again, another couple of weeks later, took the test, and I flunked. So I went down the third time. I really wanted to get this, and guess what? The third time, I passed the test. So now I was a candidate to be inducted into the Army Air Force, which happened in, I think it was February of '42. That was a short time out. I was just 19 years old, and left home. There was not a care in the world as far as I was concerned. The war was just starting, and I had no idea what war was. I was not a history buff. I was not a student, but I was lucky that I was able. Oh, by the way, I took math and I took calculus in college. It did pretty well because I knew I wanted to get into the Air Force or get into flying, so I knew I had to start to study. And I did fairly well in college. I didn't play around as much, and that persistence, I think, that started at that age helped me a great deal in the future. So I got into the cadet program. They sent me to Stillwater, Oklahoma, where I took another semester, so it made it 2 years. I had 2 years of college, and I was reasonably happy that I was still there, always hiding from the people, hoping they didn't see me, didn't notice me, and let me slip through the cracks. So before I get in any further, I'd like to just read a few things to bring you up to date of what went on during that time. A lot of people probably are not aware of this. That Adolf Hitler and Henry Ford each kept a framed picture of each other on their desk. Over 100,000, these are just things to think about. Over 100,000 bomber crews were killed over Europe. More United States servicemen died in the Air Corps than the Marine Corps or any other branch of the service. The bomber pilots, the bomber crews, had the highest attrition rate of anything. Submarines, Marines, foot soldiers, they lost more people in bombers than any other way. It's hard to believe, I know, but that's the percentage figure. In 1941, more than 3 million cars were manufactured in the United States. Only 139 were made in the entire war. 4 of every 5 German soldiers killed in the war died on the Eastern Front. Only 20% of the males born in the Soviet Union survived the war. 20% of the males survived the war in Russia. That resulted in more Russian deaths than the United States, Britain combined in all of World War II. Total casualties for World War II was between 50 to 70 million people, 80% from Russia, China, and Germany, and Poland. Over 50% of the casualties were civilians. That's women and children. Sad facts, but it's something to think about when you think about war. Before I get into the basic part of my speech, I also like to mention this to you. There were over 18,000 B-24 bombers like this, each carrying 10 men. There were 12,500 B-17s. There were 750 B-29s and the B-29s carried 11 men or 12 men. So all in all, there were, with the 180,000 B-24s and all the other planes together, there were about 300,000 bombers, 4-engine bombers. That means that if they were all flying at once, these were all servicemen, they all had to be maintained, they all had to have crews maintaining the planes on the ground, mechanics and et cetera. They all had to be supplied with fuel. It was a tremendous operation. If all those people would have been in the air at the same time, there would have been 300,000 soldiers just in the air at that one time. And that's just for the bombers. That had nothing to do with the other planes, the twin-engine planes, the pursuit ships, and everything else that they had. Okay, now we'll get back into the crux of the story. As you know, I had a very, very poor childhood, and I got into the service, and I wanted to fly desperately. I mean, that was just beyond anything I could think of. So I will proceed to show you the pictures. This is the Graf Zeppelin. By the way, my son-in-law put this program together, so some of the pictures will not absolutely be brought up to what I would put in here, but this is what he put together for me, and for the most part, it's applicable. This is the Graf Zeppelin in Chicago. This is State Street in Chicago. This is when the World War II breaks out. And this is a letter that my sister found in our parents' savings. And the thing that really impressed me was this man saying that your boy, that's true, I was a boy, I was 19 years old or 20 years old at the time. And the way they looked at us, we were just kids. And I looked at your captain here tonight, and she looks like a little girl. She tells me how old she is, or not how old, but how much service time she has, and it blows my mind. So we're going to get to I'm reporting to duty. Now I'm really, really happy. I'm going into basic training. I'm pretty far from flying, but here's my first duty. That's me as a cadet. I was, I think I was about 19. Yes, I was 19 at the time. This is the first airplane that I flew. And I'm going to start to tell you about some of the failings. Everything was going along fine in this airplane on the first flight. So the instructor takes me up and he says, "Is your seatbelt tight?" Now, if you notice, this is an open cockpit airplane. And I shook my head, yes. I couldn't communicate with him by talking. I could hear him. So he turned the plane upside down, and I fell off the seat about that far, about 6 to 8 inches, hanging on the seatbelt. And I learned from that point that accidents could happen, and that my career could have ended right there in the Air Force, or the Army Air Force, if I would have fallen out of the plane. And we flew along like that for maybe 30 seconds. He turned the plane up. Then I really tightened that seatbelt. This is at Hicks Field in Fort Worth, Texas. It's rather an interesting picture. How often you see a donkey or a jackass drinking a Coke out of a bottle. And this was called Rosie. After being in Hicks Field for a while, I went into basic training in this BT-13, And that's me getting into the plane. And I'll tell you one of the things that almost washed me out. On a long cross country, the long cross country that we had to take, I was flying along, via visual flight rules, and I had my chart drawn out on the chart, everything, my route was drawn out, and all of a sudden there was a town, and I couldn't find the town on the chart. And it was a warm summer day, and I started to perspire because if I don't make this cross country and I don't succeed at this, I'm going to wash out. So I turned around, couldn't find anything. I saw the town, went down and buzzed the tower, saw the name of the town. I looked at the chart, and I just happened to open the chart, and the town was just a little bit off the chart on the other side. I found the chart, here I am to talk about it, but had I gotten lost, that was a washout. So that would have been one more failure. Also, one night we were doing night landings, and it was a night landing with no lights, no moon, no lights at all. You just had to find the field and land. And I landed, and we did have radio control, and they called me and told me to come over, and they wanted to check to see if these struts, oops. Okay, back up. Oh, there we are. This strut right here, they want to know if that went through the wing, because I landed about 10 feet high, but it didn't, and I'm still here. Also, one thing that happened, I wanted to just very, very quietly get through cadets. I wanted to keep myself unnoticed, just sneak through the cracks. I was very, very cautious. So when we just reported to this Waco, this was Brady, Texas, and I had a friend in another barracks, so I was going over to visit him, and I just started to open the door, and I heard someone yell, "Attention, hut!" And I saw at the other end of the barracks, there was a captain who just came into the barracks, and I just closed the door, and I heard him, and he was reading them the riot act that an officer came in, and everybody didn't pop to him at attention. And I thought, oh, I'm going to go back to the barracks. This isn't going to happen to my barracks. This isn't going to happen to us. So my bunk was about 3/4 of the way down, away from the door, but I went there, and I just watched for him to come in. As soon as he came in, I yelled, "Attention," and everybody popped too. To those that don't know what pop to means, it's standing up at attention. Anyway, he walks by everybody, and he walks up to me. What did I do? He said, "Have you ever been a cadet officer before, cadet?" I said, "No, sir." He said, "You are the squadron commander." I said, "No, sir." He said, "Yes, you are the squadron." That was the worst thing that could have happened to me at the moment. I didn't want anybody to notice me. I wanted to just fly. I wanted to become a pilot, and all of a sudden, they put me up in front, and I didn't want to be up in front. But that was one of the times that I had to just bite the bullet and be the squadron commander for a month or so. This is another time I'm going to tell you about where I almost washed out of cadets. This is 2 weeks of training in twin-engine airplanes. I really didn't have too much trouble in flying. That came rather easy to me. But this one night we were doing formation flying, and say this was the plane in front here. This one was the leader, and there's one there on this wing, and then there's another one on this wing. And we were flying around at night, and I had a co-pilot, and I was just flying on his wing at night. I just stayed in the position for about an hour. I had no idea where I was. I just had to keep concentrating. For those of you who are pilots, for those of you who've flown formation, you know you can't look out the window. You have to watch what the other plane is doing. So he told us to peel off and land. So I made a right turn. I was on the right way, made a right turn, went around and landed. I got into the squad room, and he put me in a brace. You guys know what a brace is. Attention, put your chest out, stomach in, and don't breathe, but just listen. And one of the things you had to really realize is there was no excuse, and that's what I said. He said, "You realize you almost killed me?" And he started yelling at me, and I just said, "No excuse, sir, no excuse, sir, no excuse, sir," until he got worn out from yelling at me. And he walked away, and I had no idea what he was talking about. There was no way I could have interfered with him because I made a right turn out. I think about 50 years later, I figured out what happened. I think that the man on his left made a turn into him, and they almost collided. And he thought I was the man on the left, and the guy on the left didn't get what I got, and I just used "no excuse, sir," and 2 weeks later I got my wings. And I regret to this day that I didn't go, after I had my commission and wings, that I didn't go find him and find out why he was giving me the riot act, but I didn't, and I kind of regret it today. Okay, so I graduated from flight school, and they requested, we had an option whether we wanted to be fighter pilots or we wanted to be multi-engine pilots. And I always wanted to be a multi-engine pilot. Never thought I'd be flying B-24s, but just some twin-engine plane. I just thought that that would be cool. So anyway, the next thing I knew, this was another trainer. They call it a bamboo bomber. Then I got into the B-24s and went through B-24 transition and did that B-24 transition and came out as a B-24 commander, which I'll tell you, the day that I received my commission, I attribute to my wife. The day that I received my commission and my wings changed my life, because I realized at that point I was no hot shot. I was not the sharpest tack in the box, but I was as good as anybody else, and my disposition changed. So now I had confidence. Up to that point, I was just shaking in my boots that I would get through. Something I really desperately wanted, and I really, really tried hard to succeed, but I never thought I could do it. I mean, a lot of people are confident and they succeed. I'm one that was not confident and succeeded. It was a strange phenomenon. So we started flying B-24s, and I got a crew, and the crew did not know me. We were crew members, but we never flew together. And we went to, we were sent to Tucson, Arizona, Davis-Monthan Field, and we drove there in a private car, and everybody went on a troop train, and we waited a whole month. My wife, by the way, we got married November 4th, 1944, about 4 months or so after I received my commission. So she was with me. Now we drive to Davis-Monthan Field, and of course we hated hanging around. You know, this vacation was terrible. Just newlyweds on a government-paid vacation was pretty nice. So we waited there for a month, and then we received new orders to go back to Denver, Colorado, to Pueblo, Colorado, where we did our training. They closed that Davis-Monthan Field at the time. Now I go through this B-24 bomber training, and my co-pilot lived on the base. I was the only one on the crew that was married. I lived off the base, and I came in the morning. It was about 5 o'clock in the morning to the squadron, and the squadron commander came in, and he says to me, "We want to go on this photo mission." I said, "You know, Smitty, I'm not going on any photo mission. I'm not volunteering. You know I'm not going to volunteer." He said, "We got to go on this photo mission." So the squadron commander came in, attention, we all popped too, and he says, "Okay, at ease." We sat down, and he says, "Who wants to go on this photo mission?" My arm went up. my co-pilot put my arm up. So by the time I got it down, I was one of the people who was going on this photo mission. Now, we were 2 weeks away from going to Europe. We were going to be bombing somewhere in Europe. Instead, we were shipped to Oklahoma City for a period of 2.5 months additional, or maybe a little bit more, to learn how to be photo recon pilots in B-24s. The war was still going on. Then, this little hand raise took me to Savannah, Georgia, where I picked up a plane and flew that across the United States and across the South Pacific through Biak and just island hopped and finally went to New Guinea. That was another 2 or 3 weeks. Then we were put in Biak, we put in New Guinea for approximately a month as a replacement crew before we went to the Philippines. So all in all, from the time I raised my hand, I mean, take that back, from the time my hand was raised until the time I actually got into a combat situation was approximately 6 months. That changed my life. Maybe if I didn't raise my hand or have my hand raised, I wouldn't be telling the story today. So that's fate, but and it's luck, and it's all the good things. So we went to, and all this happened at the time I had I can't see the total here, but I think I had about 422 hours. At the time, I had 422 hours. I had an instrument ticket, and I flew all the way across the United States and halfway across the South Pacific. Today, as an instructor pilot, I sometimes get frightened flying with people that have 1,000 hours or more. So times have changed. Number one, we went through so much before we became pilots that we did so much, they did so much testing on us, they pretty well knew whether we had the qualifications. It wasn't a matter of throwing money at someone and getting their pilot's license. It was a matter of a physical test, a mental test, a psychomotor test, a psychologist talked to you. Oh, that's an interesting story. I heard that the psychologists always looked at the cadets' hands. So I was sure that my nails were short and they were polished and everything when I went to the psychologist to be interviewed. And put my hands up on his desk so he could see my hands. And I thought, this looks silly, so I put my hands back down. So he said to me, "Cadet, are you married?" I said, "No, sir." He said, "Do you have a girlfriend?" I said, "Yes, sir." He says, "What does your girlfriend think about you flying?" I said, "She's fine with it, sir." He says, "Well, what if she didn't want you to fly?" I said, "Sir, I'd have to get a new girlfriend." And those were the right answers. That's what they wanted to hear. And fortunately, that's probably what would have happened, except that my wife was in favor of everything I did. She was always in my corner. If you excuse me just a minute. Think of all the questions you may have for me. This is the interior of a B-24. Oh, Sulphur Springs, Texas brings to mind. One day, we were to go on a 12-hour mission. And I have to, before I tell this story, I have to tell you that when my crew was with me for about 2 weeks, they did not want me as their airplane commander. Why? Because I was Jewish and I was a coward, and that I would take the last drop of water. That's what they told the squadron commander. And the squadron commander said, look, if you don't want to fly with anyone, you don't have to. But I'll take you all and I'll put you in a pool. Well, there were two fellows that were brother-in-laws that did not want the crew broken up. They wanted my co-pilot to be the pilot and me to be the co-pilot. But he was not that well trained. I'll proceed to tell you why. Sulphur Springs, Texas, we take off in the morning about daylight. We're waiting to take off, and the tower tells us that there's a flight of 3 B-25s they want to take off in front of us. So we acknowledge that, and we wait. And we went through our checklist, and we're all set to go. And then the tower says, we have a flight of 3 P-38s to take off. Can they go? I said, sure. You acknowledge that. So then I always had the habit of putting my tail off the end of the back end of the runway, so I had as much runway at my disposal, because the runway behind you is no good if you're taking off. So I started taking off, and I gave it power, more power, and it was very slow in accelerating. I could not figure out why. And finally I saw we're running out of runway, and I gave it full military power. And we just got to the end of the runway, we lifted off, and my co-pilot said, the engines. Well, I just shoved his hand away and pushed the full military power up again, and we were just hovering above the ground. And I looked, there was no, in other words, if I lost one engine, there'd be adverse yaw. If I lost two engines, I wouldn't be flying. So I knew something was wrong. I looked out, and while we were sitting, waiting for the takeoff, he noticed the cylinder head temperatures, because we were on the ground, they were getting hot. So he opened the cowl flaps to let more air in. But he didn't tell me, he just did it. And we took off with the cowl flaps open, which is like taking off with ping pong table boards out there, and preventing us from taking off. So I looked, and I slammed my hand down and closed the cowl flaps, and we took off. I was in ground effect until that time. The tower called and asked if everything was okay. I said, Roger, we're fine. So now we took off on our legs. We had to fly from Oklahoma City, this was supposed to be a 12-hour mission, over the Gulf of Mexico, up east, and then back to New Orleans, and then up to Tennessee and back to Oklahoma City, which was supposed to be about a 12 to 13-hour flight. So now it's getting dark. It's cold out, so it's getting dark, and we turn to make our turn from Tennessee to Oklahoma City, and I see a flash of lightning. I said to my co-pilot, did you see that lightning? He says, oh, that's heat lightning, don't worry about it. I turned to my radio operator and I said, would you call Oklahoma City, find out what the weather is? And then he came back, he got the message, and then there was a flash of lightning. Our plane got hit by lightning, and we lost all navigation equipment. And we were in a storm. Now, in World War II, I don't know about the pilots that are here tonight, and there probably are a number of them. In World War II, somehow they didn't ask us or teach us about making a 180, turning around and going back. So I didn't know about turning around and going back. So I'm just flying around looking for something to stop. Well, nothing stopped except the weather kept getting worse and worse, and my navigator that night happened to leave his sextant back in the barracks. So I had no way of navigating. I tried to top this, I couldn't get on top of it. I tried to get down, and I was afraid to go too low, so I asked for my navigator to let me have the charts. I wanted to see what the general area was so I could decide whether to go any lower or not, to look to break out, or try to decide what to do. And I turned the plane over to my co-pilot, and I looked down, then I looked up, and all the dials were spinning. That's not good. The dials are supposed to be straight. They're supposed to be all going the same way. And we were in a death spiral, and I took the controls back, and I straightened the plane out and flew back up to altitude. And I said, just, I don't want to mention his name, just fly the plane straight. Let me look at the chart. So I gave him the plane again. I looked down, I looked up, and the dials were spinning. I threw the chart back, and I started flying the plane again. We didn't have an autopilot, and we were up there. At this time, we were up for about 13 hours, and my crew chief came to me and he says, Skip, what should I do about the fuel? Should I just let the first engine die? I says, no, keep the fuel balanced, keep all the engines running as long as possible. Pilot to crew, when the first engine goes, that's the sign to bail out. We were in storms, lightning, rain. It was a miserable, miserable night. So with that, I was deemed to be a coward. My co-pilot got out of the seat, put his parachute on, went down to the bomb bay, ready to bail out. And I looked over there, and it's dark, and it's lonesome. And he's gone. So I have nobody even to hand me a napkin or a handkerchief to wipe my forehead. I'm only kidding, but it was a bad situation that I should never have allowed to happen, but it happened. You know, I was only 21 at the time, so I was not mature enough to know what to do in a case like that. If it would have happened to me 10 or 20 years later, I would have known how to handle it. So anyway, kept flying around. I had a very high frequency radio that was still working. All my low frequency stuff was shot. So I was talking to an Army base in Texas, and nothing was happening. I was in clouds and everything, but I just took a heading west. If I would have been smart, I would have gone east, but I didn't. I wasn't that smart yet. I only had 400 hours or so, and I didn't have the smarts enough to know that east I would have flown out of the storm. So I've kind of paralleled it, and finally I saw a red beacon and a white light, and I saw another one, a red beacon. Then I saw another one. The front had passed through, and I could see for miles. And about 70 miles or so ahead, there was a green beacon, which meant that it was an airfield to land at. So I told my crew chief to get the co-pilot up into the seat so we could prepare to land. He came up, and we found this field in Sulphur Springs, Texas. That's my reminder there. And it was a auxiliary airfield for the civilian planes that were flying at the time, which were DC-3s or C-47s. So the next thing we know, there's the plane. If you see the mud on the wheel, when we landed, and I didn't have to use any brakes. So, they had a storm there that was really, really serious. And I had to almost use full power to get the plane to where it is. By the way, one of those two men, I think that's Bernie Seglin. Does that look like Bernie Seglin? The reason I mention that is my friend here was a good friend of Bernie Seglin, who's passed away, but he was on the crew. And he mentioned tonight Bernie, and I said, I think I have his picture up there, and there he is. Anyway, the cowl flaps are right here, and they're closed right now, but when they're open, they extend out about 8 inches all the way around the engine, and they send out a lot of drag. So it's almost impossible. Well, it's not impossible, but it's very difficult to take off with those open. So the following day, here's what happened. It was now We were in the air 17 hours and 15 minutes. We had about 15 minutes more gas in the airplane. I did not step out of the seat for the whole time, the whole 17 hours. And all I remember is I put 3 crew members to stay at the airplane, and the balance I took to a hotel in Stillwater, Oklahoma City. From that time on, I don't remember a thing until I was in the squadron commander's office, and he was thanking me for saving the plane and the ship, and he said, I could hear you talking all through this whole encounter. But I don't remember getting from where I was in Texas to Oklahoma City. I don't know how I went by. They said they flew me back. I don't know. I have no recollection. Complete blank at that point. I was so exhausted from the flight. And the squadron commander had called my wife that night after he knew that we were landed and said, we're bringing your husband home in the morning. She said, what do you mean you're bringing him home in the morning? It sounded like that they were bringing my body home in the morning. That gentleman is named Marty Zincaro, and he was a terrific guy. And Marty and I were in Palawan together, and he was swimming in the Sulu Sea, and there were some barrels in the Sulu Sea, and he was diving off the barrels. And the tide went out, and he said, watch me break my neck on this one. He did a backflip, and he broke his neck, and he died as a result of that. As the only crew member, the only cadet in my class, the only person that I ever lost in my whole tour of duty was Marty Zincaro. Now, it wasn't only luck, it was all the timing was such that when we finally were made cadets, we went through all these testings, all the testing that they did, from psychological, physical, and psychomotor, and everything else. They kind of knew whether you had the ability to fly. It wasn't just like today where if you throw enough money, anybody in this room could fly if you just keep trying. But in the service, they were in a hurry. This was a bond rally that they held at the airplane. I was not there. They finally flew the plane off after months. That was my wife, and that's me, and that's my co-pilot. This is most of the crew, and I think Bernie is in here somewhere. He has to be. Do you see him?
Far left.
Oh, right there, yeah. This is right here. Right there? We were all, I think I was the youngest man on the crew at the time. I was just 21. This is what we did. When we finally got into a job, we would fly these lines up and back, up and back, up and back, and take pictures, and then we'd turn them over to the Corps of Engineers, and from that, the Corps of Engineers would make charts for all parts of the world. Our job was to map Borneo. This is my record of my flying as we flew across to the South Pacific. I'll take a step there. From Savannah, Georgia, it was 59 hours of flight time. Today, I think they do it in about 12. Started out at Hunter Air Force Base, crossed to Albuquerque, and then Mather Air Force Base, then crossed to Hawaii. There to Canton Island, these were atolls in Tarawa, Los Negros, and then Biak, and then from Biak, they flew us the balance of the way to New Guinea in a, I think it was C-46. These are what the islands looked like, the little places that we landed. Here's the airstrip. That's what you had to fly. And every cloud made every cloud shadow look like an island. See what I mean? This is a C-46. When the war ended, I became an instructor pilot at O'Hare in the 24 71st Troop Carrier Squadron, and that's where we flew. These are the natives. Now, I'll tell you why they're dressed like that. I go through it rather rapidly. In New Guinea, they have what they call kunai grass, which is a very, very sharp-edged grass that it can cut you very easily. And that's why they wore that protection. We had these nylon charts that we carried with us on our flights, so if we were ever forced down, we could probably not get out. The reason we could not get out, if we landed in Borneo, you couldn't make a mile in a day through that thick underbrush. So if you didn't land on a river, you had no chance of getting out of Borneo. Here is Palawan, Port-au-Prince, where our operations took place from that strip. There was a metal strip. You take off coming toward the woods, which was uphill. You landed going uphill, and you turn around and you went downhill to get out, to take off, regardless of the winds. That's not a common thing to do, but when you have a hill to go up or down, that's the way it worked. And we lost one plane by taking off at night that just did not, some way got discombobulated, and instead of going up, he went down right in the water, and 10 men were killed. This is Port-au-Prince today. It's now one of the real pearls of the Orient. It's really a great vacation spot, so they say. This is where we were stationed. This is the first plane that I flew when I got to the South Pacific, and I was told by the photographer 50 years later that he took that picture, and that was the first flight that I made. I was not aware that he even took a picture. That's the nose art today. It's not what you'd see on airplanes today. This is this gentleman right here. Whoops, sorry about that. This gentleman right here, next to me, he was there just before I was. So this was our first indoctrination flight. His name was Ernie DeGraw, and Ernie DeGraw, after the war, flew for Eisenhower in Air Force One at the time. And I believe he is still alive. And I don't think any of the other gentlemen are. York. Oh, this is a glamorous crew. That was the way we lived in a coconut grove. This next picture is we were lived in that tent, and the ocean, the China Sea, was about 50 yards from our tent. This was my navigator. This was a navigator, and this was another pilot, Biggie, and this fellow Johnson was a radar operator, but I don't know what he did. The skinny guy on the right was me. This picture is in the Smithsonian. Oh, it was not all work. I bought that sailboat for $300, I think. I sold it for $300. We used to buy stalks of bananas for 2 pesos, and that was about 50 cents. And the bananas in the Philippines, when they were green, they were ripe, and they were the most delicious bananas I've ever found anywhere. And I don't think they export them. This is downtown Palawan. It's a barber shop and bar. This area right here is in Manila, and they would send us here for R&R for a weekend. And this whole area was just like a tent city. Just sit out there for the crew, all the war-weary people. We weren't war-weary. We went from one tent to another tent. It was not much of a change, but we were still away from the coconut trees. This is Manila Harbor. Most of those boats out there were Japanese that we sunk. You seen a lot of these pictures before? I figured. That was the old post office building. This mission, if you see that my wingtip there, was to take pictures of cemeteries or anything else that we wanted to take. We just went on a photo mission. We took cemeteries so they could send pictures back to the families where soldiers were buried. This is Corregidor. I think most of you heard about Corregidor. This was after we retook it. This is Borneo, picture of Borneo, the oil tanks. When I first got to Palawan, we had to fly to Borneo. We just flew to where the smoke was. Now, people would ask me if we were attacked by Japanese. And I'd say no, and I couldn't figure it out. And I learned 50 years later the reason. Well, some people are leaving. I guess I better cut this short. We wondered for all these years why we weren't attacked, and we found out that the Japanese had pulled all their aircraft back to the mainland as kamikazes because we were preparing to invade Japan. Had we invaded Japan at that time, we would have lost maybe 2 million men. It would have been a disaster for both sides. I was flying back from a place called Zamboanga, and I decided to look at some of the territory at a low level. And I was flying along, and there was this man standing. We went by so fast, he didn't even turn around. He didn't even know we were there. The sound didn't get there. There's another one followed.
Howard, what was your airspeed?
About, it depends, but I would say around 180, 190.
What was your altitude normally?
Pardon me?
What was your altitude normally for the photo mission?
Oh, to do the photo missions over Borneo, most of the time we were at 6,000 to 8,000 feet. Interesting you asked that because one day we were flying in the clouds, we broke out, and there was a mountain about 12,000 feet right straight ahead of us. Because it was uncharted territory. Now, something I was going to tell you about this This was in Zamboanga, where the monkeys have no tails. And they had a shrine that they had built along here, along this pier, and there were footprints in the concrete. And I asked why this was a shrine. He said, well, there was a guard that said that he was on duty, and an angel told him that he should take a nap right here. And the angel walked and these footprints came from the angel. And I guess he got away with it, I don't know. This was the normal guard for all the children, all the males, until they got to puberty, I guess. That was my co-pilot and I, and they were begging for gum or cigarettes. By the way, I never smoked in the service. None of my crew members never smoked in the service. It was just unusual that none of us smoked. This airplane's a PBY, and one of my friends was over at my house one day that I knew for about 50 years. He was in the auto parts business, and so was I at the time. And he said, happened to casually say, when I was on Palawan, I said, when you were what? He says, when I was on Palawan. I said, what were you doing on Palawan? He says, I was flying PBYs. I said, wait a second. I ran upstairs, and I got this picture, and I gave him a picture of his own airplane. That was high priority stuff. Someone asked me about that. Did you ask me about high priority? That was one of them. Now you can see the cowl flaps now. You see they're open? Partially open?
How long did the runway have to be?
About 3,500 feet. But the day I took off at Oklahoma City, I think it was a 6,000-foot runway, and I just pulled the plane off at the edge of the runway.
What was the name of the artist who did the nose art?
I have no idea. And this is the group of officers. That's me, and I don't think anybody else is here that you know.
Interesting about that picture, the reason it was probably taken, it's the same day that they signed the Peace Treaty Award of Missouri.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
September 1945. I think that was the official end of the war.
Well, I'll get to that in a moment. This path reminds me of one night I went to the latrine, and we had a big latrine. It was about 10 or 15 people. And I walked in and I saw this spider that was that big. And I don't like little spiders. And I didn't realize tarantulas don't bite people. But I went back to the barracks and I got my shotgun, my 20. And it was an over and under, a shotgun and a 22, but I took the shotgun. I didn't want to miss. And I hit that thing. And about 15 minutes later, the whole area is loaded with MPs. And I said, what happened? What's the matter? They said, we heard a gunshot. We were afraid we were being attacked by the communists. I said, it was just me. I just shot a spider. This is the Marine Jumper, the plane that I came home on. The ship that I came home on. Flew over, got a ride back. This is the picture that I found in the Smithsonian of the area that we lived in, and then I looked over and saw my picture in the Smithsonian, which to this day I can't believe. I mean, you could get hit by lightning easier than being in the Smithsonian. But there I am, and it's still there. That picture is in the Smithsonian. That's the picture right there. Anybody know who's on first? Did anybody know who they know there? I'll tell you, that's me. You recognize me now? So you see 46 again. Now here's my idol. How many people here know who Paul Tibbets is? A lot, okay. I was at Oshkosh one year, and Paul Tibbets was there. And I sat down and talked to him, and one of my friends took the picture. He was the most delightful, articulate, quiet man. He had a hearing device because his hearing was shot, but he was just the nicest man. And I asked him if he would sign the pictures for me. He said, yes. I mailed the pictures to him. He signed them and sent them back to me, and I cherish them. I mean, if it wasn't for him, who knows where we all would be today. And when people say that he did a terrible thing, I don't know how many people believe that. They have to be brain dead if they do, because we would have lost millions of people, Japanese and Americans, and all the Allied people that were trying to attack Japan, because they were there to die. They didn't care. They were going to a better place, so they didn't care. They just were prepared to die. And when they dropped the atomic bomb, I guess it just changed their mind. Oh, now we come to some of the pictures that are probably not that, that important to my history. But this is, I belong to a Paragon Flying Club, and my son-in-law did this, so he had to get his wife in the picture. And that's my daughter. And that's my airplane. Anybody want to buy an airplane? They had a dedication of that stamp, and I was the only B-24 pilot that they could give it to, so they gave it to me. I took some Cub Scouts through on a tour of the field. That's when I received my Master Pilot's Award.
Now I skipped one.
Say again?
Right here, Howard.
Pardon me?
I skipped one thing. For those of you who know, pilots know, Howard, one of the things he managed to pull off, and I meant to put out in the introduction, is an ATP is the license an airline pilot has to have. If you talk to a kid coming out of aviation school today, he will whine about how difficult it is to do that course. Howard did that when he was 85. I gotta tell you.
It just happens that I'm the oldest person in the world to ever do that. And I just felt like doing it. Then I did something worse than that. I went up helicopter, trying to be a helicopter pilot, and I got 15 hours. I got to the point where I could hover, and I thought, this is enough for me. I only have 2 hands and I need 3. I can't do it. This plane was I owned a half interest in this airplane. And one of my friends, that was my wife, my daughter, where was my train of thought?
Sorry.
I lost my train of thought. What was I going to say? Oh, no, that's not it either. Pardon me?
You were the half owner of the airplane.
Oh, that's right, thank you. I was a half owner of that airplane, and there was a fellow that wanted to buy a half interest in my plane, and I said, no, but I bought a half interest in that plane, and my partner decided he would take him as a partner. And it was really against my better judgment, but he took him in. And he got his multi-engine, he had his multi-engine rating, but he did not have a 421 rating. It was too much airplane for him. When he was flying my plane, he taxied off the runway into the mud, and he had to be towed back, and he flat spotted tires because it was just too much airplane for him. So one night, when he got his license and my partner decided to accept him, the requirement of the insurance companies was that he flies with a flight instructor for 5 hours. And I volunteered to fly with him for 5 hours. Didn't charge him, I just said, I'll do it. So I flew with him for 5 hours, and I still had trepidations, but he was okay. And I called my partner, he says, Howard, I don't want you to tell me anything about him. I'll find out for myself. So they flew to Kansas City, and on the way back at night, they hit some bad weather, and I think they iced up pretty badly, and I don't know if he put the ice boots on or the ice heaters or the prop heaters or anything, but they made a turn to final, and they spun in, and they all died. The 4 people died in the airplane. And it was one of those things that I'll never forget. And I at first felt guilty, and then I didn't feel guilty, and now I had nothing to do with it. But it was something that kept me up many nights after that happened, because they were all nice people. So we go on to the next step. That's when I got my ATP. This is my whole family, which is the doing of my son-in-law. And I'm still enjoying aviation. And that's all. Now I'd be very happy to answer any questions, if you have any. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Did you get shot at?
That's a good question. No. The reason I didn't get shot at, I explained that they pulled all the planes from the South Pacific back to Japan for the invasion was coming. One of my good friends was a sailor. He was a commander of a boat, and he went back to the States to get a boat in preparation for the invasion. So everything was go. We were going to invade Japan until he dropped the bomb. But besides, the Japanese never would have shot at me. My wife would have gotten very angry. Any other questions?
How many hours do you have?
Say?
Couple hours.
How many hours? I probably have about 6,000. That's not a lot of hours, but a lot of hours are accumulated by airline pilots where Charlie does the flying and they sit there and twiddle their thumbs. Most of the flying that I did, I flew the airplane. It made a big difference. Oh, I recently, last week, renewed my flight instructor's renewal, so now I'm flight instructor for 2 more years.
So I have some stock questions I ask every EAA guest. Do you remember the moment when you looked up and said, I want to fly? Was there one incident that
Yes.
absolutely lit your fuse?
Yeah, well, actually there were 2.
Okay.
My uncle was a mechanic, and he had a mechanic's place next to the Montclair Theater on Grand Avenue near Harlem. And I used to go in that hangar, and he had a plane, an open cockpit plane, and the wing was off on the side, and I used to get in that plane and make believe I was flying. That really left an impression upon me, then we lived on Division in Sacramento, I believe it was, in a basement apartment. And I used to go outside, and that's when I saw the Graf Zeppelin for the first time. And I'd see these pursuit planes, and I thought, oh, I have to fly. So now, you know, the title of my story is My Two Dreams. Well, I always dreamt that I would want to fly. That was paramount in my mind. I wanted to fly. So that was one dream that was fulfilled. Now I look back at what I did, and that's another dream. So I have two dreams, and it's been a very, very fun ride.
Okay, got another one of my stock questions. All the airplanes you flew, which was your favorite?
The one I was flying at the time.
All right.
Actually, though, the B-24 did me well. My present plane has been fun for me. We flew all over the United States, Canada, the islands.
Is that the 421?
The 421, yes. And flying has changed so dramatically. You have no idea. Nobody, unless they're a pilot today, knows what a transformation it was from needle, ball, and airspeed to what you have today with the GPSs, the WAS, and all the radar altimeters and fuel totalizers and all the things that can keep you safe. It takes a lot more learning.
Oh, I have a question.
Sure.
Are you still using maps?
Pardon me?
Are you still using maps? Are you folding up paper maps?
Absolutely. They've gone to using iPads now, and
And I wonder,
they've accepted iPads, so you can use iPads for your charts. And you can carry them around. Even the airlines are using them. They carry around that little pad instead of a whole briefcase full of charts. And so it's a wonderful transformation.
but when you fly now, are you still folding those paper maps?
No, I use electronic devices. It's so much easier if you know how to use the electronic device.
Yeah.
Where were you when where were you and what happened when they told you that the war had ended?
I was in the Philippines I was on Palawan when they dropped the atomic bomb. And when they dropped the atomic bomb, I thought, wow, the war is over. And when they dropped another one 2 days later, I thought, why did they drop the second one? What possessed them to drop two so close together? They should have given the Japanese a little time to decide whether they were going to believe in this or not. But they dropped the second bomb, and that was their decision. I would have waited myself personally because they killed a lot of people, and you know, war is not fun.
And when, after the war had ended, were any of your planes flown back to the U.S. or did they send them over to BIAC to the scrapyard?
You're right about BIAC. You must know something about this because I flew war weary planes into BIAC. But yeah, some of them did fly back. I don't know what possessed them to not fly them all back, but I flew some war wearies back to BIAC. How do you know that?
I used to know Earl Reiner, who had the Victory Air Museum, and his brother had a base out at Milwaukee.
Yeah.
And he had that collection over on Gilmer Road in Mundelein, but he told me about having been at BIAC after the war and seeing all B-24s in there.
That's really something. It's amazing for me to come across somebody that knows something about what happened in all those planes. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Did you ever have to fly so high, over 10,000, 12,000, 15,000 feet, you had to wear the special gear to stay warm?
You know, as a matter of fact, that's an interesting story. We were flying out of Pueblo, Colorado in the wintertime. We were flying at 23,000 feet, and the temperature inside the cabin was 43 degrees below zero. And all we had were the fur flying suits, and the crew members had the heated flying suits. But the moisture from the condensation just gave me a big icicle down my throat, chest. And something else that happened that was quite interesting. When we were up there at that altitude, my nose gunner said the nose gun is not working. Can I get up in the top turret? I said, sure, go ahead. And he says, oh, the oxygen's not working here. I said, well, take the one off the side of the ship. So he had a long, maybe a 10 or 15 foot hose going to the side of the ship. So now he goes up there, and we're flying along at 22 or 23,000 feet, and it was pretty cold. And all of a sudden, there's an explosion. And my co-pilot says, abort, abort, abort. I said, why? Pilot to crew, take walk-around bottles and attach them to the main other system. And we stayed right in formation. And nothing happened other than the fact that when he pulled that side out, we were just loaded with crystals that filled up the whole airplane of ice particles from the oxygen. Yes?
Two questions. One, did you ever meet any of the pilots that trained at Glenview Naval Air Station? And two, did you ever get to meet any of the Memphis Beale crew?
Of whom?
Memphis Belle.
Never met any of the Memphis Belle, but I knew many pilots that went through the Glenview Naval Air Station. One of them was a good friend of mine by the name of Howard Ross, that I flew with quite frequently and became very friendly with him. He passed away. Yes, sir.
What would be the most stressful situation you've had while flying?
The most stressful situation? If a wing fell off, which they don't do. Stressful situations, we get low on fuel and you're in instrument conditions and your radios go out and you can't find the airport. That becomes stressful, but it doesn't happen very often. Yes, another question?
Did you ever get to fly jets?
Sir?
Did you ever get to fly jets?
Just one time. Those are for kids. They're so easy to fly. And I'm saying that very seriously. I mean, you just have one lever to push to go and one lever to pull back to stop. So what could be simpler than that, instead of having all the levers that we have in our present planes? Yes?
Did you get out of the Army Air Corps then right after the war? And if so, then what did you do right after that?
Well, here's what happened. I stayed in the reserves, and I became involved in flying out of O'Hare Field. And I was a flight instructor in AT-6s, which is a single-engine plane, and AT-11, which is a twin, and the C-46, both instruments and transition flying. And I stayed in until 1951. And then they called us up to go to Korea. And I asked for a 90-day delay to sell my business, and they never called me. There's some questions in the back. Yes?
When the first time you flew, or, when you looked down, were you scared at all?
I have Alzheimer's, so I didn't hear all you said.
I can translate. He said when you first flew in a plane and you first looked down, were you frightened? Did that frighten you?
To be very honest with you, very candid with you, I have never, ever been afraid of flying. Now, walking up a tower, a water tower on a 5-story building is a different thing. That's entirely different. But I never had any fear of flying. Yes, sir.
What do you attribute your good health and vitality to?
Let's see, how old are you? And I really can't tell you. I really can't tell you in this audience. You get the message? You got it. That's.
Have you more recently flown some of the warbirds that are around today?
If I recently flown what?
One of the warbirds
The warbirds?
that are around today.
I flew in the B-24 that came into Milwaukee one day, and it was about 50 years after I'd flown in a B-24, and I got out of the plane, and there were 4 gentlemen by the 94th Aero Squadron behind the fence. And as I walked by, they said, was it worth it? And with tears in my eyes, I said it was worth everything, anything I could afford. It was such an emotional thing to be back in that airplane. It was hard to describe. But the plane was good for me. I mean, I enjoyed it. Frankly, flying changed my life considerably, with the good help of my wife. But other than that, I have absolutely no complaints. I'm the luckiest guy in this room.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
You said you were in the seat one time for 17 hours. Didn't those B-24s have a bathroom in them or anything?
No, they had relief tubes, but I did not move out of my seat. I stayed in that seat for probably 18 hours.
A relief tube?
A relief tube. I'll draw you a picture a little later. Any other question? Yes, sir.
What was your favorite experience while you were deployed in World War II?
My favorite experience in World War II? Coming home. No, seriously, as much as I love flying over water for 6 hours or 7 hours to take pictures for 20 minutes was not that exciting. We used to play chess. The pilot, co-pilot, the navigator, and me, we used to play chess because it was really boring, because there was nothing to see. You're just sitting there. Those pilots in the room that are airline pilots know what I'm talking about. Are there any in the room?
My
Yeah.
husband was a 727 captain, and they played chess going out to San Diego.
Is that right? So you know I'm going to tell you the truth. Yes. I wish I could answer that if I only heard it. What?
She said, after 17 hours, how did you feel about taking your first steps outside the airplane?
You know, I was only 21 years old, 22 years old, and I had no fear of flying ever. So when this was over, it was over, and I just was kind of exhausted, mentally and physically exhausted. But oh, I forgot to tell you, when we landed, my co-pilot got back in the seat. Now, I was a bad guy as far as he could tell. He wanted to be the airplane commander. He unbuckled his seatbelt while the plane was still moving after the wheels touched the ground. I swear on my grandchildren's life, he started kissing me. I mean, how times changed.
Or I've heard other talks you've given, so I want to reference something you did and some other ones, especially since we have, how many Libertyville High School students do we have here? Get your hands up for me. Okay. You talked a good deal about experiencing anti-Semitism when you first entered the Army Air Corps. And you didn't say much about that tonight.
Well,
Address that a little bit.
as I say, I wanted to become a pilot, and I took a lot of guff from people that I would never take today. And my relatives were O'Briens, Carlsons, Johnsons. I had no ill feelings toward anybody, and all of a sudden, and I was not religious. I knew nothing about religion. I was born in an area where there were no Jewish people. I didn't associate with any Jewish people, so I didn't know the difference. It was just all strange to me. And for all of a sudden, people to hate me, I don't know why. I didn't do anything to cause it. I didn't think I did. And all of a sudden they hated me, and it really, well, you know, they didn't only hate me, they hated a lot of people. I remember one day we were in the barracks, and some Texans were talking about how what they used to do on Saturday night is go nigger hunting. I said, what are you talking about? We used to get in our cars and see if we go hit a nigger. And this is what I heard back in the 1940s. So there were a lot of ignorant people then, and I suppose there are still some, but I I've come across it and I don't stand for it any longer. Not because I'm religious, not because, just because of the stupidity of it. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Have you missed most about being active duty?
Interpreter.
What do you miss most about?
Pardon me?
What do you miss most about being in the Air Force, if anything?
What do I miss most about being in flying?
In the Air Force.
In the Air Force? The Air Force changed my life. I mean, I was nobody but a stupid kid with no ambition to study or anything else until the war came out. And all of a sudden I had a reason to do something. And I was lucky that I found a woman that stood behind me, and I became successful at what I tried to do. And I really do, honestly, from the bottom of my heart, can say that she changed my life as much as anybody. And in the 72 years that we were married, she never heard me say no. Never did I say no to her. Anything that she wanted was yes, because I knew what she did for me.
Good for you. Are you gonna write this down?
You know, my grandson's after me to write it down, and
Yes.
I should, I suppose. I should. It,
Somebody should have had a camera.
Yes, we should have had this.
yes, ma'am.
Have you been interviewed by the Pritzker Military Library?
Yes, I have been interviewed by the Pritzker Military Library, by the Oshkosh. They have, the Pritzker has it was an all-day thing, so that was on tape, and that's available. And I was interviewed at Oshkosh. I was interviewed at Pueblo, Colorado, in their museum. And I'm just a lucky guy. I mean, I'm the luckiest guy in this room. There's nobody that can compete with my luck.
Just so you know, tonight's being filmed. So there's a record of this whole presentation.
Say that again?
We bugged you. They've been filming this whole thing. So
Perfect.
this whole episode tonight is on.
Is it really?
I would buy a copy.
Wow, that's fabulous.
Yes.
Are there any more questions?
All right, we're gonna get one more, and then I knew if I keep custodian, all the staff who's been tonight's be here till midnight tonight, I'm gonna leave, so.
What's that question?
It looked like as a reconnaissance aircraft, you had about the same size crew as the bomber aircraft. Is that true?
Yeah, I'm sorry, my Alzheimer's kicked in.
He said, did you have the same size crew in the reconnaissance version of the aircraft as you did in the bomber?
Oh yes, we always carried ammunition. We always had we always had a 10-man crew. Well, thank you all for your indulgence. I appreciate it. Thank you.